Our panelists today will contextualize that era. We are looking at the period from 1920s to the 1950s, which was a bustling period, not just in Bharat history, and all the contractors and subcontractors who were part of this generation, but also the history of Bombay. There's several things that's happening in the city. Some of these things the panelists will draw attention to, and in general, the panelists will try and recreate what it would be for a property owner or a homeowner, how it would be for that one person to go about redecorating, to purchasing a flat or purchasing a property and then redecorating, or what are the nuances that he'd probably have to keep in mind.
Thank you, Samitra. Thank you, Mrs. Bhatia. And thank you for inviting me and us. For me, this was, I was very delighted to come because of several associations. Firstly, it's about Bombay, and never to say no about this. I'm also very, Mrs. Bhatia, I'm very close to her kind of dream, because once, many years ago, I interviewed her. We are in a place which is so closely linked to the history of the city and that moment. And I'm going to touch upon that moment, and I'd like both of you to touch upon it, etc. I call it Bombay's modern moment. 1920s to 1945, 1950, till independence, and slightly beyond. It's still visible in all around us. It had a tremendous impact, and that was when many things came together. So, while we know about the facade, we don't know about the interior life of this building. What was going on inside? Have you been discovering that even inside, the modern Bombay resident wanted to do something new and exciting? So can you tell us a bit about that?
I want us to think about the ways in which firms built this city. We think about the city as urban planning or as architects. I appreciate the architects. But we hesitate to think about the ways in which the city required industries, and it required industries that were devoted to and integrated into a coherent sense of what was new and what was exciting and how it fit together. And so Bhatia and I have talked a lot about the ways in which her history working here on Bharat Tiles, my history of Kamdar, they're the same projects, right? The same people are coming back and forth, the same architects come back and forth. And so the ways in which the city is being built by a sort of a set of people who have their own agendas, have their own priorities, have their own profits to be made, but are all seeing the same chance to shape and direct and experiment and design, and to see the sort of legacy. The legacy in firms that survive, but the legacy is in this built environment. And I think, sort of thinking about your introductory remarks, the ways in which people were building to last. This was an attempt to build a city that looked in a particular way, that felt in a particular way, that could be experienced, not just in moving through the street or going to a public building, but how do I live in my own house, and what does that look like? And so in my research on Kamdar, going around and talking to people who had new buildings that came up in the 30s or the 40s, the line that I keep hearing is, I moved into this Art Deco building, or I moved into this new flat, I needed new furniture, my stuff looked out of place. In the same ways that, the old styles didn't fit as the city remade, as the city expanded, as the city embraced a certain kind of cosmopolitan ethos. And the ways that that filters out into so many different areas and so many different places, I think that's what makes this exhibition so fun. And then thinking about the ways that open up these other questions. Who were these other firms? How do they fit together? What is that shared vision of things? So
I have a question, and I'm going to bring that up in a little while, but let Mustansir kind of expand on that and give his perspective. So what we are basically coming to is a new vision was emerging. Maybe pre-nationalist, maybe international, but definitely cosmopolitan with Indian touches, Indian capital, Indian engineering, Indian architects, and somewhere in Indian sensibility, with a connection to the rest of the world.
Sure. I think what we need to do is just take one step back and look at this also as the history of a new material which is emerging in the country, which will soon almost take over the country. And that material is cement. I don't think this exhibition, or in fact even Bharat Tiles, can be disassociated from its connection with cement as a material. Now when cement first comes up and is used in even some of our Saracenic buildings, it is known as artificial stone, because the intention is to imitate stone, but of course you can mold it, so you can have different shapes, and then what stone did earlier with the, with the labor of dressing it and so on, now can be probably, mass produced with just molds. So cement looks like artificial stone. And somewhere here there is also a very curious phrase which says colored marble. Okay, now marble is inherently colored, but colored marble here means any color you like, which means that it is artificial again. So the tiles become for marble tiles, imitation marble tiles, or they move on from that to say any color you like. And I think the notion of color as opposed to natural colors, the notion of a palette of colors, somewhere here early in the exhibition they say you have 24 colors. Now that is not an automatic menu card when it came to the time before cement. Okay, and this paradigm I think is an important kind of change. Very briefly, the first cement factory comes in the 1880s, I think in Madras. But by the 1920s, the various cement factories after the First World War, they kind of come together. And there is in 1925 the formation of what is called the Cement Marketing Company. And I think this is the real paradigm change, because this word marketing is something very unusual. And once the Cement Marketing Company comes, they really go at it with such zeal and vigor that probably Mr. Modi can learn from it. And you can see that just if you just walk around and look at the number of advertisements. Remember, these are only a flooring, but they would market cement so aggressively that everybody gets taken by that. Okay, the architects get taken by that, the patrons get taken by that, and cement literally becomes every person's material, thereby completely overshadowing the earlier form of construction, which is load bearing, like this building, which is a load bearing building. Now once from the late 1920s, 30s, 40s and 50s, you have a new type of building which is built out of cement or RCC, steel and cement. I think you have a different kind of way of appreciating even the interiors of buildings. Because the one great difference that cement does, or RCC buildings do, is that they separate the frame of the building from the envelope of the building. Okay, the frame is now independent of the envelope. Envelope meaning the walls. And then you can do whatever you like. So which is why suddenly you now start to get larger openings, bigger windows. Most interestingly, the corners disappear. Earlier with a frame structure like this, the corners become the heaviest, because that is where you have your columns. But if the corners are no longer needed, those are places where you can have windows. And anyone who has seen the best of Art Deco in our city will probably recognize the corner window. Now, when such things happen, I would argue that the quality of light which comes inside the rooms changes substantially. Okay, if you turn off all the lights, you will see the quality of light in a load-bearing structure over here. How the light comes in. But if you went across the road where you can see an Art Deco building, you'll probably see the quality of light is substantially different because the windows are larger, much more light is coming in. Okay, and you can see that in every photograph over here. Okay, which are all Art Deco buildings. Look at the quality of light that is coming in. And I think this also brings in a certain change in the way the interiors are thought about and the interiors are fashioned. So I think this is one point which we can keep for the time being. We can perhaps discuss more.
Yeah. So, Abigail, in your researches and whatever you see seen around us. You mentioned that the new buyer, or rather tenant, because most of them were tenants at that time. One of the interesting things I found out when I was doing a little bit of research on Marine Drive was people were simply not interested in buying because they were expensive, because they felt that living near the sea, and, why should we shift? And most importantly, they felt that they could come here for 3 months, enjoy the monsoon, and then go back. And so one of the descendants of one of the landlords said to me, our grandfather used to always tear his hair because people used to come in and say for 4 months and say, isko blue karo, isko red karo, isko green karo, and then next tenant would come in and say, those were the days. So when that new person moved in and felt that they needed a new flooring, a new furniture, perhaps a new way of living, the bathroom inside, for example, the toilet in the bedroom, which is quite revolutionary. Were they also kind of moving into a new ethos of becoming more, in quotes, after all that architecture was known as modern.
Right.
I mean, were they moving into a new ethos to say, now we are, let's forget the past, let's move? Was it some kind of collective vision, statement, call it whatever you will, if you have to say?
But I think so, and I think you can sort of see it in a number of ways. And I think some of it is so much of the new construction is in many ways oriented towards people who are themselves new to the city, right? So as the city expands, we think of the city as a stable thing, but the population is doubling every 20 years, and so many people are coming to the city new from other places. And as we all know, when you move, you often need to, you don't bring everything with you. And so that sense in which I'm starting off life new, I'm in a place that is embracing a certain kind of novelty of physical space, of materials, of the landscape of the city. And so therefore I can express that in
that's
these
reclaimed land, so that's new in itself.
Yeah, it's exactly.
You mentioned Port City. I mean, there are buildings which are nautical in a sense. Sunamahal is a bit
Very
like
much
a ship with,
In fact, if you want a very interesting kind of a differentiation, is you look at the buildings along the Oval and you look at the buildings along the Marine Drive, they are slightly different to each other. These also mark two sets of reclamation.
Yes.
Because by the early 30s, the Oval was reclaimed. But it required 1940 for the Queen's Necklace to happen. So the buildings on Marine Drive are post 1940. The buildings on the Oval are actually all built in 3 years, something like 36, 37, 38.
With touches and flourishes which are not present in most of the Marine Drive.
Which are not present in most of the Marine Drive buildings. But the real difference between the two, if you want to see, if you're asking about the mindset of the people, is just look at the names of the buildings. You have Empress Court, Windsor Castle, Queen's Court. Well, court because there's a high court across, but Belvedere. Look at these names. So these are actually saying, of course, remember that a lot of the buildings were for renting out to the British at that time. Okay, but when you look at Marine Drive, you have Keval Mahal, Kapoor Mansion,
Except that the first 8 or 10 buildings have Western names.
No, they have Western names, but there's green.
And St. James's Court.
Yeah. St. James's would just be an exception to that. So here, from the 40s onwards, I get a sense that even the people who are building and living had a sense that the British are going sooner or later. And we might as well start to set up a kind of future.
We should not forget there's a Bharatiya Paving there, which is clearly a statement.
Yeah.
I want to speak to that cosmopolitanism, because I think one of the things that's so interesting to me about the sort of the exhibition is that German connection, right? And what was striking to me about it is that sense in which the cosmopolitanism of we are aware of, engaged in, and sort of part of this larger movement of architecture, which comes under Indian hands, under Indian ownership, not a British thing. But there's a striking connection between Bharat and then Kamdar, in which both have a German designer connection. And that sense in which the Germans, they're working for us It is an Indian, it is a Swadeshi, we're going to do it here. But we now master that, and we can deploy that internationalism in our own firms for our own ends in ways that's perfectly confident. So it's, there are certainly European firms that are competing, and, Cloud Bailey continues to be a very prominent architect. But that sense in which the professional control is shifting also, I think helps to illustrate that.
Internationalism can be seen especially in the interiors, isn't it? You have Shara and Langhammer, the ones who do the interiors of the cinema theaters.
Actually, I was going to come to that because since you said that they're already visualizing the so my let's say fantasy argument has been that the 1930s and 30s definitely it's also a way of saying that we are rejecting Gothic Indo-Saracenic, because we don't think that you build this beautiful Victoria terminus here as definitely to tell the natives that we are here for a long time, and now we are saying with these buildings that yes, we belong to the rest of the world, but we are turning our back towards the empire. So in a sense, this was an international style, not globalized, but international style, but done by Indians.
But Sidharth, the British turned, not the British, the empire turned their back as well. Because very interestingly, if you see these buildings published in some of the journals, one phrase which is really, stands out is that buildings like Art Deco are called lesser architecture of India. Okay, and this is a very important phrase because it clearly sets the hierarchy. Monumental buildings are, they don't use the word greater, but then that's obviously what it is. So VT station, the museum, the general post office, that's real architecture.
But they impose.
Not only they impose, you are meant to look at it and walk. Okay, but everything else that is done, which is done for the common denizen, comes under the list of lesser, and in one sense is not even looked at. Okay, but it is within that the entire subculture emerges and very soon takes over, because after the gateway of India, I do not think Bombay has any colonial buildings. Okay, the gateway of India, I think, is the 1920s. 24, right? After
this
that,
particular one.
yeah, of course, this particular one. After that, everything is done by the local. Entire.
This is where your point that you've made in other places say that it's in domestic architecture that the new comes, and that the sort of public spaces are still defined and controlled by public works departments and official requisitioning, whereas it is the space of the home and construction for residences that the British see as beneath them, and that's where you get the fun stuff, right? That's where the energy can come, that's where the sort of invention can come, and that's where the space for
And
British,
you also have to
non-British
then
firms.
connect it to the rest of the world, because that's exactly what is happening.
Yeah.
Art Deco is far more prevalent than you can imagine, both in India as well as in the rest of the world. Because the more you kind of explore Art Deco, the more you see it's happening everywhere. So there is a common sensibility in which the Indian architects and the Indian patrons are very clearly plugged in.
So, while on the subject of interior, these newcomers, shall we say, or a lot of wealthy people from outside Bombay who want a residence near the sea or in this modern, cosmopolitan environment. Remember, Churchgate Street is also where the bars are, the dancing clubs, the clubs are, the restaurants are, and all that. And they want to be part of that, and they feel confident enough to embrace it without feeling inhibited. Are they also making conscious choices of rejecting something and embracing this? It's not a question of saying, I need new furniture, but I could easily get new furniture which happen to be old in style. Are they consciously rejecting something?
Well, I think in that sense of, and again, I think the connections to the nightclubs and the bars is great. Again, the Condor collection did all the bars and the hotels and the restaurants as well as the residences. And the idea that you would go out for dinner at La Bella or at the Rendezvous or wherever, and it would be the same style of chair you'd want at home. So that sense in which those are not separate worlds, those are in fact a shared visual landscape becomes part of it. But I think also there's a sense in which all of them are embracing a different kind of sociability, which is impossible to imagine around really stuffy, really heavy, lots of ornate trinkets and tapestry of a Victorian era furniture. And so the sort of sociability of a jazz nightclub, it's hard to imagine that with a lot of like gilt tassels, right? I mean, unless they're in your clothing, maybe. But so that sense in which the sort of ethos of dinner jackets, but also of going out dancing or going out to a bar or having, you know, a bar in your own house, it implies a certain embrace of the public and private life of the city in ways that I think speaks to the home as being a more liminal space than it used to be. I think one of the things that's happening in the 30s and the 40s in this very lived community, obviously, is that there's a publicity of the home. There's a sense in which it is a space for entertaining. It's not a retreat space. It's not a space shut off from the world. It's a space in which the kinds of socializing you're doing at the Taj or at, you know, wherever
you can replicate
is going to come home.
It's interesting we are talking about this in the terms of the new at that time. And you find several younger families today who may have inherited this place and saying, uproot that tile, terrazzo is old fashioned, that furniture needs to be thrown out, while everyone else then goes to Chor Bazaar or Bharat Tiles to look for heritage tile. How do we explain this rejection now?
Well,
and how do we explain the recognition, both?
Well, so there's a way in which I get that. My aunt and uncle are here, and we're faced with this. We've got all this old family furniture. I've got a small house. I don't have room for either. Like, what am I going to do with all this big stuff that I inherited? But I think there's also that sense in which, getting back to that, we were building for the future. We were building for all time. We were building to last. That sense of people wanting to imagine this city as having a fixed essence. That to me is where the heritage movement comes from. Like, in the movement in which the boundaries of the city are endlessly expanding, that everything is being torn down and built back up, the things we can hold on to and that can link us literally materially back to the past, whether it's an old chair, whether it's a tile, whether it's the keeping the old columns in an old building. That's that sense of the city is not totally shifting under our feet all the time. And so I think the sort of desire to pull down makes us all want to hold on to the things that are there.
Mustansir, going back to something I began with, and I know because you're also a poet, a film buff, or culturati, so to speak. I want to ask you, a lot of things are happening around this time, aren't they? I mean, there's new ideas coming up in cinema. The first cinema theaters come up, so which means Hollywood films coming up. You can see the great films that we heard about. Poets are emerging. There is a sort of nationalist fervor which is mixed with the Second World War has not yet begun, but eventually begin. What else was happening around that time which created this, and in this city, which created the spirit of modernity? I was reading a book, it's a wonderful book which, about Gandhi in Bombay. And a lot of people contributed to Gandhi financially. They gave him a place to stay. He stayed here for 20 odd years, off and on. Labor movements, this ferment, this political ferment. You look around Bombay today and you realize how apolitical it has become. But there is a lot happening. So what exactly, how does it all come together, that particular essence?
I have one theory about it, and I think that is the conflation of the middle class. Okay, what happens from the 1920s onwards is that you start seeing a rising middle class, which tends to a certain extent break through earlier hierarchies. Okay, and this is for a variety of reasons. One may be that the public spaces in Bombay are becoming much more public. I think the cinema theatre is a very good metaphor for egalitarianism in the city. It allows everybody to come together and so on. But so do the buildings. Remember that the one real paradigm is that of the apartment building. Okay, how do you define the apartment building in Bombay? It's not defined by the fact that there are flats, but it's defined by the fact that you're living next to a stranger. Okay, you're not living within your own community like the wadis in Bombay, where you would have large numbers of people from the same community kind of congregating in one place or living in one place. But in an apartment block, your neighbor could be entirely different from you, religion-wise, caste, community, maybe even a Britisher, who knows. Okay. Now, the ability to live together across the board becomes a very important part of the mindset of the city. The acceptance of each other in the public space. You do not look at somebody who is of this caste or that caste. Cheek by jowl in the trains, the cheek by jowl in the buses and the trams, and so on. So this inclusivity, in a sense, also then transfers to a certain aspiration. In the sense that from the 20s and 30s, the people who are, say, living in apartment blocks, the rising middle class, have access to pretty much the same things that earlier the wealthier would have access to, in terms of, popular culture, in terms of entertainment, in terms of access to information, education, and so on. So the hierarchies which were earlier there tend to flatten out. And I think if you bring this through all walks of life, it probably does tend to answer your query, of how things kind of homogenize in a level that there is no higher or lower, in a level where access is equal to all.
Except that, even the modern flats, so when you look at Parel, because the city was at Parel,
Yeah.
when you look at Dadar, King Circle, Dadar Parsi Colony, Hindu Colony, and Matunga,
Yeah.
there was a congregation of communities a little bit, but people had then moved into flats. So the potential for your neighbor being a stranger increases, but the feeling of wanting to be close to people of your ilk, in a sense, doesn't quite go away.
It takes its time. But what would you say about South Bombay, for example? Out here, that would be much more cosmopolitan.
Yes.
I think the other thing to also remember about the flats, and this is again the product of reclamation, is that flats were much smaller than what a lot of people had experienced prior to that. Okay, so you had to live in tighter spaces. You had to live, the cheek by jowl was rather too close for comfort, right? But it is, when these buildings, when say the Oval Maidan buildings first came up, they were roundly criticized, okay, as being too pokey, too congested. Yeah, I mean, this is all there in the Journal of the Indian School of Architecture. But living in smaller spaces also leads to a certain kind of, understanding of who is next door to you and how you're going to live together. You have shared amenities in a single flat, which even if it's 4 floors, would probably have at least 8 tenants. So these things do tend to come together. And of course the other central idea is that of rent. Okay, people didn't own their flats, so there is a certain mobility which you can see, and that mobility brings in a certain elasticity of appreciation and understanding